After the FBI started investigating a Pere-based company for wire fraud and money laundering, the case is finally settled against Summit Contracting, a roofing and home remodeling business.
Summit admits to wrongdoing and defrauding some of its victims and taking their money under false pretenses. It's all in the plea agreement reached today in federal court, but the victims tell Action 2 News they are not satisfied. Brittany Schmidt joins us in the studio to explain why. Brittany.
Cammie and Bill, victims have waited for 4 years for those originally charged in this scheme to be held accountable. Each of the 4 people indicted last year faced more than $1 million in fines and decades in prison if convicted. That is no longer the case. As part of this plea deal, the fault is no longer placed on the individuals, rather on the company as a whole. This move changes how the courts view sentencing and punishment. Just hours ago, Summit Contracting owners Chad Shampers and Nate Smith walked into the federal courthouse with their attorneys after signing this 14-page plea deal. In it, the home improvement company admits it defrauded its customers. In the newly released documents, the United States Attorney charges that Summit Contracting employees utilized high-pressure, deceptive tactics and false statements to induce prospective customers, and then misrepresented the terms of the financing being offered. Those are the same claims customers told First Alert Investigates in our original reports back in 2019. Several customers told Action 2 News at that time they were tricked into signing documents like loan applications that actually turned out to be legitimate paperwork, unknowingly signing over large amounts of their money immediately to Summit, saying the project was already complete, when in some cases the remodeling work promised hadn't even started. In these latest federal documents, Summit Contracting admits that's what they did, saying these facts are true and correct and establish its guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. As part of the plea deal, the U.S. Attorney's Office had to file a new indictment with the same information but changed who is at fault. It puts the blame on the company as a whole, no longer on these 4 individuals indicted by a grand jury last year. In February of 2022, our cameras watched as deputies ushered Chad Shampers, Nate Smith, Gina Shampers, and Jeffrey O'Brien into the federal courtroom on 9 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire and bank fraud. If convicted, each person faced more than $1 million in fines and decades in prison. The FBI said the 4 defendants wrongfully obtained or tried to obtain more than $1.5 million from customers. The defendants' attorneys filed a motion to dismiss the case last year. A federal judge denied it. But a few months later, the defendants' attorneys argued the FBI search warrant at Summit's offices in De Pere in 2019 wasn't valid. Court records indicate a large amount of the evidence in this case was obtained at that search. After months of arguing between both sides, a judge ruled there was enough question about the search warrant to hold a hearing to determine if it could be used in trial. A few weeks later, the government said it would work out a plea deal with Summit instead and asked to cancel that hearing. That brings us to the plea deal filed this week. This afternoon, the individual indictments against Shampers and Smith were dropped in lieu of 1 charge of wire fraud against Summit Contracting. The indictments against Gina Shampers, Chad's wife who worked in the business office, and O'Brien, the lead salesman, were also dismissed. Shampers pled guilty to 1 count of wire fraud on behalf of the company, Summit Contracting. A judge ordered Summit Contracting to pay almost $90,000 in restitution. An attorney for the company says the corporation dissolved a few years ago, but was reconstituted and has the ability to make restitution payments. The judge ordered Summit Contracting remain under probation for a maximum of 5 years or until the restitution is paid to customers. Shampers and Smith did not comment after court. First Alert Investigates maintained contact with several victims as this case made its way through the federal court system. For fear of retaliation, the victims released a statement to Action 2 News saying they are saddened the charges were dropped, holding them personally responsible, and they wanted a different outcome. But they are thankful the U.S. Attorney was able to clear the loans, restore their credit, and get money back. Cammie, Bill.